Okay, so what we could do now is to look at certain case studies where those historical and sociological and economic forces come into play, where they intersect with each other in the formation of more contemporary ethnic communities. And in particularly, I'm talking about so-called ethnoburbs, right? The suburban areas comprised of a particular ethnic group and its economic development within that enclave. And as we discuss these communities, pay attention to the history behind it, the kind of immigrants that are coming over, the historical forces at play again, economic and sociological factors that describe what's going on. So our first look will be at Monterey, and this is located in the San Gabriel Valley of LA. And certainly I could discuss other adjacent suburbs and cities around Monterey Park like Alhambra, Covina, that have underwent similar transformations in ethnic and economic terms. But we'll focus on Monterey Park because I believe that's where this ethnic transformation first occurred in the San Gabriel Valley during the late 80s and 90s. Okay, now before globalization, LA or Los Angeles' economy, generally speaking, was based on certain industries, particularly automobile industries, aircraft industry, technology, certainly Hollywood and the movie industry. You also had agriculture still around, agribusiness as an important part of LA's economy. But as we know, with the 1970s rather, we see deindustrialization occur. Deindustrialization of many of these industries I just mentioned. Certainly not all. I mean, in LA, you'll still see the persistence of certain industries, like the garment industries. You'll see these sweatshop factories still continue in the 80s and 90s, and many of them will be comprised of ethnic minorities in these secondary labor positions, right? But again, this happens with the advent of a service economy, and that's so crucial to understand here. Los Angeles now becomes a post-industrial city. Yet eventually, it does become revitalized by the concentration of and the globalization of finance capital and certainly labor from abroad. And here, again, we have to think of the global economy, right? Not just the national economy. U.S. capitalism, as we described, is irrevocably global at this point. And again, we see this with the increase in the foreign labor supply within the service economy. We see that increase of foreign commodities and certainly foreign financial investments, right, within Los Angeles, right, or investing into Los Angeles, let's say real estate or business. So the labor market in this new era of post-industrial capitalism or the service economy, as we know, is comprised of primary and secondary labor positions, primary and secondary jobs. And certainly Asian immigrants will fill in both labor needs, both types of jobs. But because contemporary capitalism is indeed global, as we've discussed, you see foreign capital investments widen at this time. And again, this is stuff like real estate purchases, establishing businesses in the United States or Los Angeles in particular in this case, right? Foreign, like say Chinese or Korean investment into Los Angeles. And certainly when we talk about Monterey Park and San Gabriel Valley, we are talking about Chinese capital in particular. We see the increase of Chinese businesses and finance into LA. And, that's coming with the increase, of course, of immigration of the Chinese professional managerial class. We can abbreviate that as the PMC, the professional managerial class. And thereby they establish their ethnic economies in Los Angeles. Now, Unlike earlier ethnic economies, let's say pre 1965, when we talk about Asian Americans, well, there were small, stores, maybe a laundry, maybe restaurants, certainly, small groceries, and so forth. Now, these smaller industries are characterized by these enterprises that required, little skills or education, certainly. So, you don't need that professional class here for that labor. Right? Obviously, that's the case. But now, with the post 1965, these jobs are marked by these enterprises requiring high levels of technological skill, high levels of education, high levels of capital investments. And when we think about the particular niches here, we're talking about, say, financial industry, computers, real estate, medical facilities, research, medical research, and so forth. Now, for example, in San Gabriel Valley, you'll see the Chinese computer products. These are manufactured in Hong Kong or Taiwan, and they're headed to California. And how do they become, dispersed and widely available in California? Well, they pass through Monterey Park, right? Once you have a critical mass of Chinese settlement in that area, they pass through, well, the San Gabriel Valley, and it's via the Chinese businesses. So what happens is Monterey Park starts to evolve into a transnational business hub. Okay, in fact, you could even quote that, a transnational business hub. Now, this economy is possible because most of the Chinese who are now deciding to reside in Monterey Park are highly educated, they're well financed, they're well experienced in business. And again, it's easy to compare that with a pre 65, where, again, Asian businesses were very local, requiring very little skill, like the restaurants and stores. In those economies, the labor was often the family members, right, that worked in them. Well, here we see, the professionals coming into the United States and incorporating themselves within the primary labor market. Now, again, I have to emphasize that doesn't mean that there's no secondary labor market, let's say, positions occupied by immigrants, let's say Monterey Park. But really, the growth of this area is spurred by investment, capital investment, and high level investment, like I keep saying. Okay, so with this business background, you see again the Chinese entrepreneurs begin to move into the suburbs of LA. Okay, because at first they were going to the more central parts of the city, let's say even in Chinatown. But then they began to realize that they could afford the suburbs for starters, right? And look at Monterey Park for our particular example by the 80s and 90s. Now, before, as noted in the slide here, before the Chinese come in, Monterey Park was predominantly a white, middle class, working class neighborhood. There were also smaller numbers of Hispanics and Japanese. And by the way, there was some Nisei there that would eventually complain and protest against the influx of, another Asian ethnicity, right? Chinese from China coming in there, and they would be involved in the so-called slow growth movement that we'll discuss shortly. But again, it's predominantly white, and it is suffering, however, by this time from the early deindustrialization. There were some factories and manufacturers around, but they closed down. And therefore, you see the when it transitioned to a service economy, you see a lower, residents. You see a lower income among the residents, And you see the property values of Monterey Park start to lower as well. And because it's more affordable by the 1990s, actually by the 80s is what it starts to begin, Monterey Park attracts attention of Chinese immigrants who are part of this professional managerial class. Okay, like again the PMC, the real estate uh, technicians and engineers and so forth. So you see the influx of these new Chinese immigrants again due to how suitable it is for them. You know, it's close enough to the city. It's about, I believe, 10 miles, only less than 10 miles away from central LA, maybe about less than 10 minutes on the freeway. It's close enough to the city, but, you know, it's, again, a suburb. Now, Chinese real estate businesses, they really promote the buying of property and the relocation of the professional Chinese into Monterey Park. So they're promoting it, the real estate. You know, in China, they began to call it, in fact, the quote, Chinese Beverly Hills, unquote, like the Chinese Beverly Hills. So they're here boostering, right, the Chinese relocation into Monterey Park and, again, San Gabriel Valley as a whole. So this puts in motion drastic demographic transformation here. You see whites moving out of Monterey Park, see the Chinese moving in with large numbers. Now, by the 1990s, Monterey Park becomes the only city outside of Hawaii, that is, the only city in the United States with an Asian American majority population. Again, that's not including Hawaii. Right? Now, as I mentioned, this transformation was not without staunch resistance from whites and even other Asians like the Nisei and other minorities like Latinos. They joined what they call the slow growth movement. And when you look at this term slow growth, it doesn't seem to be race based. It's just saying like it's saying that, you know, capital growth is what it seems to be aimed towards ostensibly, capital growth. But let's remember that capital growth is spurred by Chinese capital. So you could say this is code, if you will, for anti-Chinese immigrants, the sentiment against Chinese capital, right, and Chinese growth. So this is what happens. It's a big political issue. You also see English-only campaigns that come up. Why is that? Because if you look at that slide here, they freely use, you know, Chinese writing here, right, rather than only English. And again, some nativists dislike that. They feel like they're encroaching in their neighborhood. They feel like they're making them change rather than the new immigrants adapt to American communities. So it leads to this big political fight. But still today, in Monterey Park, 65% of the city's population is now Asian and predominantly, of course, Chinese.